I want to talk with you about figures of speech and sound, or sounds in poetry. So if we flip over to our section over figures of speech, some of the ones that are mentioned, metaphor, simile, of course, you're probably familiar with those already, but other kinds of metaphor include implied metaphor, extended metaphor, right? Synecdoche and metonymy, personification, which you're probably familiar with already, hyperbole, understatement, paradox, oxymoron. All right, so those are some terms that you want to be aware of going into our section on poetry. I do have some handouts available to you that deal with synecdoche and metonymy, like telling the difference between those. Sometimes students confuse those two, but I do encourage you to take a look at those handouts. I also want to talk with you about sounds in poetry. So let's take a look at that section, sounds. So we have some terms that you're probably very familiar with already, like onomatopoeia, alliteration. We have what is called assonance, which is the repetition of the same vowel sound. It's similar to alliteration, except with assonance you're dealing with vowel sounds instead of consonant sounds. Sounds can create harmony or euphony, or they can create a sense of, like, clashing sounds, like cacophony. Okay, so when it doesn't sound harmonious, it's cacophonous. Of course, we're familiar with rhyme, but we might not know that different kinds of rhyme exist. Okay, so definitely you want to learn to differentiate among the different kinds of rhyme. Sometimes something seems to rhyme. We can hear a little bit of similarity in the sound, but it isn't true or exact. And some different terms for that situation is near rhyme, slant rhyme. I tend to use the word, I think, slant rhyme, or the term slant rhyme. You definitely will want to know what internal rhyme is versus end rhyme. You will want to know the difference between masculine rhyme and feminine rhyme. You will definitely want to tell the difference between assonance and consonance, because I will ask you questions about that in regard to the various poems we will look at, and possibly, more than likely, on the final exam as well. Alright, so I think that concludes the section of terms for sound. Let's also take a quick look at patterns of meter. So typically when I think people think of poetry, they think of, sound, they think of patterns of sound, they think of meter. Poetry, to qualify as poetry, a poem doesn't have to have a meter. If it isn't a metered poem, it will use other devices, though, to distinguish itself from prose. But in this section over patterns of rhythm, we want to become very familiar with what a stress is, okay, and the concept of scanning a poem, scansion. Definitely you will want to look at the specific patterns that the book tells you about, like the different kinds of feet, the iamb, the trochee, the anapest, the dactyl, and the spondee, right? The book does give you like example patterns, so you can learn to tell the difference among those. The most common, probably the most common pattern that you will see is the Iambic Pentameter. It's been used very commonly in literature. Shakespeare was a fan of Iambic Pentameter. So in the poems that we're going to be looking at, I do want you to, like in the sample poems that I've given you, the ones that you didn't choose from, to the ones that you're not going to choose from, that we're supposed to look at as a whole class, the ones I think highlighted in yellow. Try practicing, see if you hear any sort of meter going on. There might not be, but there could be, and it might be more subtle. And that's something that we can end up, talking about later in the term as we go on.